everyone that's made it face-to-face, and welcome to everyone that's joining us online. As I mentioned just before, we've had about 180 people register for this event, so absolutely fantastic turnout. For those of you I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name's Chris Kirk. I'm the General Manager of the Startup Hub here at Lot 14. And today it's my absolute privilege to facilitate an event titled Coming to Terms with Australia's Cyber Threats in Australia. It's the first of a very topical multi-part series we're going to run. We're going to try and run an event of this format once a month. And today we are very lucky to have some leading experts to help bring insight into the new reality of cyber warfare in Australia, share opportunities for how cyber startups can contribute, and bring light to how businesses can protect themselves against these extremely sophisticated attacks. Now, it is a bit of a funny format, having face-to-face and digital, and we've had, I think, about 30 questions submitted by the audience as well. So what I'd ask is for anyone in the room, just pop your hand up. We'll have a microphone that comes over, and love to keep this as conversational as possible. And for anyone that's joining us online, please, you'd be well and truly used to Zoom calls now, but just throw your comments in the chat. We'll either pick it up via the moderation function, or we'll try and get to them at the end of the session as well. For those of you that are new to events at Stone & Chalk, just a quick explanation as to who we are and what we do. Stone & Chalk's a non-for-profit. We started in 2015 with a really unique mission to help nurture, connect and propel those entrepreneurs seeking to solve the world's most pressing business and social problems. That's seen us today support over 800 startups at any one time, 800 entrepreneurs at any one time across our hubs in Sydney, Melbourne and Adelaide. And we've got a really fantastic community across a whole number of emerging industries, including cybersecurity, which is obviously the focus of today, as well as space, defence, financial services, clean energy, the list goes on. Today's event literally could not be more topical. I think it is very hard to pick up the paper. If you even look in the last week, there's been countless articles about cyber threats, about Australian companies being held victim. This morning, there was an article in the AFR around the latest attack on Garmin that some of you may have seen, and rumours that they've actually just paid $10 million in ransomware to give back or to get back access to their data. You may have seen the last few weeks, Prime Minister Scott Morrison come out with several announcements around increased vulnerability of Australian businesses. And he made some comments along the lines of malicious cyber activity against Australia is increasing in frequency, scale and sophistication. There's been close to $1.5 billion of additional funding that's been put forward over the next 10 years to actually increase Australia's cyber capability. And there's been numerous headlines about Australian companies being caught up in cyber attacks. So this event today and our fantastic speakers, who I'll introduce in a second, are really here to start to answer some questions like, what does this mean for each of us? Where's the opportunity set in some of these challenges? And what can you and I do to better protect ourselves in the road moving forward? So without further ado, I'll introduce our three speakers, starting with Hai Tran, who's here with me today. Hi, great to have you along. For those of you that haven't met Hai yet, he's very much the new kid on the block to South Australia. He's been here a couple of weeks now in the newly appointed role of CEO of the Australian Cyber Collaboration Centre. Hai will explain briefly what that is in a few minutes. But for those of you that don't know Hai, he was actually formerly the Chief Information Security Officer at Western Australian Police Force. And before that, he's actually a seasoned entrepreneur as well. So great to have you, Hai. Then on screen, we've got Michelle Price. Many of you would be familiar with Michelle Price. Michelle has worked closely with Stone & Chalk for a number of years. She's been CEO of Cyber since 2018. Her LinkedIn profile is long, but includes been very instrumental around 2015 with the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet actually informing and setting the Australian government's cybersecurity policy. And she's also held various roles, including in the National Security College within the ANU University. So Michelle, fantastic. Great to have you on board as well. And great branding there in the back with Cyber. That's good to see. And then last but not least, we thought we'd have to include a resident Victorian and entrepreneur. So we're super lucky to have Dr. Vaughan Shanks. For those of you that don't know Vaughan, he is a seasoned entrepreneur. He's actually co-founder and CEO of a company called Sidearm Technologies. which is a Melbourne-based startup that's built a case management platform for security operations. Before Sidearm, Vaughan worked at Palantir, who some of you may be familiar with, and has had almost 10 years of experience in the Department of Defence, both in Canberra and Maryland, leading various DevOps teams and driving analytic modernisation around cybersecurity using big data. So really sort of well-rounded group of people. And hi, Michelle and Vaughan. Thanks for joining us, everyone. And yeah, looking forward to a really good discussion. Fantastic. So to kick things off, we've got a couple of questions that we've taken out of sort of topics or themes that the group have put forward as being interesting to explore. But we would like to keep this conversational. So please, for those online, submit your questions through the Q&A function. And for those in the room, just pop your hand up and it would be great to explore. We might start, Michelle, with you. So as I mentioned briefly before, there's been quite a bit of rhetoric lately around sort of this new era of, Australian businesses having to start to come to terms with quite sophisticated and sometimes state-based actors performing cyber attacks. I wonder from your perspective, maybe you could help share a bit of insight for the group as to, when the Prime Minister comes out and says we're entering a new reality, and there's been even sensationalism about sort of Australia moving into this, Cold War 2.0 sort of scenario. Like, help us actually understand, what does that mean, and what does this new reality that people talk about look like?
Sure. Well, again, hello everyone. So it's kind of, I guess, an iteration on reality, really. So the commentators who are saying that this is a new reality, I guess, would be probably largely journalists and also sort of, I guess, industry kind of commentators who haven't really had much to do with cyber before, because of course the Prime Minister's statement that he made a couple of weeks ago is following a long line of statements made by Prime Ministers before him in Australia that sort of kicked off by Tony Abbott in 2014 when Australia made its first statement of that kind. And so the statement was made publicly. It was also made in writing. It's just that at that time in 2014, there were very, very few Australians who understood what cyber risk meant and what the threats were that were posed to our country, to our economy, and to our way of life. So fast forward to 2020, and we actually do have, because of so much more media reporting, but also discussion in the business community, as well as between government and industry and academia around cyber risk and cyber threats, so much more understanding. And so the sort of around what this landscape is starting to feel like. And so the statement made by the Prime Minister really had two purposes. One, it was to, I guess, demonstrate some leadership out into the economy that, yes, businesses, if you've been experiencing some strange activity on your networks, can you please kind of check in with your service providers or check in with your IT team if you've got one internally, because we do have an uptick in malicious activity going on within Australia, as lots of other countries around the world have been experiencing because of COVID and the push to, sort of online activity. But the other purpose of it, of course, is to project, I guess, what we call in cyberspace soft power and a sense of cyber diplomacy in being able to be one of the voices in the international domain that's signalling that, hey, bad actors, we know what you're doing. We know that you're starting to use infrastructure that's privately owned as opposed to publicly owned, and that, we're going to start to push back on you, and we are mobilising our communities to do so. So really the Prime Minister was reminding us that we all do have responsibilities locally as well as regionally and internationally around how to push back against malicious actors.
Thanks, Michelle. I think that's really helpful because from a business perspective, it's often hard to cut through, I guess, what is political rhetoric or positioning versus what is reality and impact for me. And, that being said, we've seen a lot in the media lately specific to the impacts of COVID and, the potential increased threat for small business. Vaughan, as the most qualified person on this call and the resident Melburnian in the room, I'd love maybe a bit of commentary from you around trying to help the group unpack fact versus fiction, and is targeted attacks up? Is the rhetoric or exposure different for businesses now, or is it really just a case of there being a greater torch or light being shone on what has been happening for a long time?
Yeah, I think, Hello, yes, calling in from Melbourne here, where we're currently in lockdown 2.0, so quite appropriate to be talking about Cold War 2.0 as well. I think there is really, yeah, the PM's announcement, as Michelle said, heralds I guess, the need for all of us to do our bit to shore up defences and to, I guess, to understand when certain changes in society happen, why that's happening, like the context behind it. So when we are going to drop billions of dollars on shoring up cyber defences, and that's taxpayers' money, we need to justify what's going on. And so the PM is obviously trying to warm everyone up and share a common understanding. I think that there's a lot of parallels here between the current wave of cyber attacks and COVID-19. To echo Michelle's point, this has been going on for a long time, and those in the know have seen this whole cyber war thing unfolding. But it's reached, I think, a peak at the moment, unprecedented levels of activity, and part of the reason for that is just that there's various international tensions have built up, and it's just this is basically a soft tool, or well, it can be quite a sharp tool, but it's one of the tools available for statecraft. So sailing your frigates through international waters is another way to show a bit of muscle. Obviously, anything that involves kinetic action is going to draw a kinetic response. So we don't really want to start shooting. I don't think anyone wants to start a shooting war. So this will remain a Cold War probably for a long time. And in terms of how to think about this, they say history doesn't repeat itself, I would say, but it often rhymes. And this feels a lot like the parallels between the pandemic or say, when you have the Blitz in London back in the Second World War. It's really, there's a collective sense that we're all at risk here, and it's almost like a in a sense, like a contagion, where if I get infiltrated by a threat actor, I'm part of a supply chain. That threat actor can abuse my email account. They can abuse the access I have to dupe the other businesses that I deal with. And so if I'm dealing with a large and important Australian company, even though I'm a very small company, they could use my IT as an access vector to get into something that really does matter, that will affect a lot of people. And I guess, the way to think about this is, down here in Melbourne, if we leave the house, we're all wearing masks. And part of that is to protect yourself, but also to stop you from spreading the infection to other people. And another example is where you have, something like the Blitz, where you have blackout curtains in your windows, and you don't want to be that one person that has your curtain window open and gives the bombers something to aim for. So I think it's just collectively we need to shore up defenses to the best we can and let the government lead on cyber war. Obviously, we can't take actions ourselves, but just be prepared and be realistic about the risks.
Thanks, Vaughan. Hi, I'd love a bit of commentary from your perspective. I mean, the Australian Cyber Collaboration Centre has quite an integral mandate to help businesses with capability around cybersecurity. And Vaughan touched on some interesting points around really helping business owners understand almost the strategic rationale for why they're potentially targets. Do you think that Australian businesses in general now have come to terms or sufficiently with the threat of potential state-based actors hacking? And why do you think, or maybe could you give a bit more, could you help elaborate a bit more as to why Australian companies are actually attractive targets for this sort of activity?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chris. I guess in normal warfare, Australia is relatively safe from attack, being an island, a continent, an isolated country. It does take a lot of effort to get to Australia and attack Australia. I think Darwin was attacked during World War II, but we were relatively safe. But in a cyber world, those physical separations, the distance that we have with other countries is bridged through the internet. And as a first world country, Australia does have a lot of resources, information, technology, intellectual property that is attractive to other countries who are trying to steal that information, but also steal money. And the reality is that in a cyber world, the kids who were hacking in the 80s for fun have grown up, and they need to pay for their expensive Lamborghinis and Ferraris. And state actors, they like information. Why send a spy to Australia on a plane when you can send a cyber spy? Now, I'm not saying that doesn't happen anymore, but it's much easier to commit certain crimes like fraud and theft virtually than it is in the real world, because you don't have to physically be there. You can attack from anywhere in the world to anywhere else in the world that's connected to the internet. So given that Australia is a first world country, it has many resources, it has prominence in the global community, and an attack on Australian business is essentially twofold. Firstly, there's a financial gain. Secondly, it's also essentially a show of force to say that we can get to you, Australia, and without an appropriate response, it doesn't really provide a deterrence. And the reality is that most Australian businesses, whilst they understand that there is a cyber risk, I think there's a bit of a perception that it probably won't happen to me. Why would someone attack me? And as Vaughan said, we are all a target because we're a part of someone else's supply chain. So whether you supply medical supplies or software or food or something like that, at the end of the day, you're part of someone's supply chain, and an enemy will always attack the weakest link. What I learned at military college, that an army can only go so far as its supply chains. So, whilst you might only have 1,000 troops on the front line, you've probably got 9,000 troops supplying that front line. So that's why we're an attractive target, because we are a relatively soft target, because we aren't prepared for war, especially a cyber war. We've been quite isolated, but we're a rich country ultimately, and that's what makes us a very attractive target to criminals. And I think the reality is that we've got really great organisations like the Australian Cyber Security Centre and the joint cyber security centres around the country. We've got we've got organisations like AusCyber building that capability, and also Cyber CRC. But the reality is that where I think the A3C can help is, and I spoke to Tammy from my budget earlier today, is that we can actually help connect what you need to do with how you can do it. So we all know about, or most of us know about the Essential 8, some don't, but it's actually easier said than done, and it becomes a very hard situation for organisations where there's a bit of a minefield on where I should start. And the A3C takes a very pragmatic approach to looking at the problem and actually speaking to businesses, and particularly small to medium-sized enterprises, to think, well, whilst we can't all afford to implement all the Essential 8 in one hit, what can we do from day one? And if you haven't got a backup, and if you haven't tested your backups, then that's probably a good place to start, because regardless of whether you have a fire or not, having an evacuation plan is a really good start, regardless of whether you've got fire suppression or fire detection. If you can get your staff out safely, I think that's what you can do from day one. And I think it's the same with business preparing for an incident of cyber attack. Prepare your business as if it's going to be attacked from tomorrow.
Perfect, thanks. I think there's a number of things there that I'm keen to loop back on. One, some case studies, like talking about Tammy. Two, the Essential 8, and I think having a conversation with this group around practical next steps, because that's often a mental roadblock for businesses thinking about, okay, this is such a big problem, where do I start? But before we go into that, Michelle, I could see you nodding and smiling. This is almost the culmination of your life's work, or at least the last couple of years of your life's work. It'd be great if you could maybe elaborate on some of the comments that both Vaughan made around really like the extent of what us as individuals or as businesses can do, and then also some of Hi's comments around some of the facilities or infrastructure or processes that are actually in place at a national level, so at an Australian government level, to protect businesses. Because I think there's probably a little bit of confusion as to, well, if I'm a small business and I'm victim to a nation state hacking, well, surely I can rely on government and other lines of defence, and what do I need to be worried about and do versus what are the structures or systems or support that I can rely on from others to do? Could you maybe just help elaborate a little bit there?
Yeah, sure. And, you know, I love the gender diversity that we've got going on here and, you know, the backgrounds as well, because I'm multitasking, friends. I'm live tweeting at the same time as we're talking, of course, as I'm known to do. So I think that, you know, some of the really important elements of cyber that aren't necessarily widely spoken about, that kind of start to draw together why these things are important, and the insights that, you know, that Vaughan and Hai have given this morning already, is that cyber is so contextual. This is what makes it so challenging, but also so exciting at the same time. You know, the digital world is changing at such a rapid rate, but us humans aren't as quick to respond. We're actually quite reactive in cyberspace. And so, you know, I think when you bring all of those different kinds of elements together of the ways of doing business in a physical way, and then how we've been able to transform some of the elements of the ways that we do business online and the efficiencies that we've gained. And, you know, of course, in a commercial context, it means that there's opportunity to kind of make bigger margins and be able to innovate in a more sort of regularized way. Every single instance along that journey is so contextual. And this is, you know, we see a lot of ransomware, for example, using malicious software that is being recycled because we've got so much legacy in our IT systems. But also, actually more than that, and I go to one of the questions that someone on the online audience has asked around, you know, what is the importance of humans in all of this? It's not just the IT systems that have legacy in them, we have legacy in us. And so, you know, every instance of a malicious actor being able to take advantage of an opportunity or being able to plan a sustained form of attack, if that is successful, that same kind of battle rhythm could not be as effective tomorrow if we have upped our game in how we collectively protect against attack. And so I think it can be hard for businesses to appreciate why it's important, but then how to take action, as you say, Chris. And so the types of infrastructures that are being developed at a national level, absolutely, AustCyber is a big part of that. We're not only here to do one of the most important things that a nation could be doing right now in a cyber physical world, and that is develop a sustained, growing, sovereign cyber industry to be part of its armory, to work with other sovereign cyber industries to develop innovative technologies, but also services that involve humans in all of this. You know, there's a whole series of other things that AustCyber does in partnership with the likes of organisations like A3C and also Stone and Chalk, and obviously bringing with us all of that, the portfolio of companies that we have, and of course Sidearm is one of those, to be able to push every single button that we can, whether that's in the education system to make sure that, you know, the reference that Hai made earlier about, you know, the kids that were growing up in the 80s that first got their Commodore 64 and, you know, or their Atari console, and were learning how to break code to be able to get around the graphics, but to be able to make things work differently. And, you know, the old J-car electronics kits and how you could actually get the notes to work and flash in different colors. Like, I'm going back to my childhood here, which was 5 minutes ago. You know, that all of those things have meant that we have now got a cohort of people within this country that have underutilized skills that can be actually mentoring and teaching kids who have lots more technology at their disposal, the reasons why we should be using these skills for good, and how you can actually be using those skills for good in a commercial and entrepreneurial context as much as you can within a government context to fight back at that sort of true definition of what war is. And I think that that concept of war and how businesses can be part of the way that we fight back does go to what Vaughan was saying, is that, you know, that it doesn't sort of really matter what kind of analogy or visualization works for you, whether it's immunization, whether it's workplace health and safety, whether it's, you know, all of the boats going in the same direction raises the tide. It doesn't kind of really matter what works for you. What needs to actually happen is for all of us to care a little bit more. And so one of the things that we say at AustCyber is that as much as all of this, this kind of warfare-like environment that we do find ourselves in can be quite scary and can feel quite overwhelming, there is so much opportunity in all of this. And so AustCyber, you know, we've recently released a digital trust report that actually places revenue and jobs value around digital activity and demonstrates that if we actually get the cybersecurity equation right together, So not in isolation from each other, but actually working together around our different contexts and in the world that we live in through supply chains and value chains. That is the biggest form of deterrence that we could ever have against malicious activity, because it actually undermines their entire business model of why they're doing what they're doing. Most of them are doing it for economic gain in their own ways, but others are doing it to be able to propel their strategic advantages forward. Our greatest asset that we have in Australia is our way of life. And so we do need to actually work together to make sure that the malicious digital activity isn't undermining the awesome digital activity that we have in Australia that's you know, propelling our way of life forward.
Thanks, Michelle. Vaughan, I'm keen to flip gears a little bit and maybe have you elaborate on some of the comments that Michelle's made. Speaking directly about attribution analysis, which is a topic that some on the call might not be familiar with. I'm really interested. There's been a lot of, I guess, almost beating around the bush conversation in terms of really trying to understand, if I'm a small business, well, who are these nation states? Who is really doing the hacking? Is it even valuable for me to understand and attribute some of these attacks, or you know, at least understand the profile of who might benefit from accessing my information? Could you, one, maybe explain for the group a little bit about what attribution analysis is, and then two, you know, start to give us some insights into, you know, what do we actually know about, you know, the profile of where these attacks are coming from, and also, you know, we've talked about state-based actors, but what about the private sector too? Like, is that, you know, can you give us any insight?
Sure, I'll share what insight I can.
We're going to direct quote you on each thing, and Michelle's going to tweet it under pressure.
I'm assuming this is going out to the world, so I won't say anything that I wouldn't be happy to share. I think it's important to remember that attribution is a two-way street. So on the one hand, we might be wanting to know for a variety of reasons who's behind an attack. But on the other hand, the attacker might want us to know something of attribution. And that could be they want no attribution. Like we don't want you to know where this came from. They might want it to look like the activity of criminals, but be hiding, you know, under that guise, but actually be a nation state. They might be conducting a false flag operation as a different nation to drive a wedge, for example. Or they might want you to know 100% that this came from them, and it's a psychological operation. They want you to know that if you, you know, sail your ships through this particular region of the world, you know, the lights go out. So in terms of though, so flipping that around to on the victim side of attribution, there's several information needs. So firstly, at a government level, through, you know, private diplomatic channels, it's good to know who's behind something, because, you know, so, you know, Tobias Feakin knows who to pick up the phone and speak to, and tell them to, you know, please stop doing that. And we know it was you. It's also useful. So for the people, the cybersecurity experts that are defending our networks, attribution is very important because it can give you a hint as to what's likely to happen next. So if you want to determine the intentions and the capabilities of an attacker, we already know a lot of what these attackers are capable of. We know the signatures of the attacks they use. What we want to know is, as soon as possible, determine who's attacking us, because then we know what they're after. Okay, so if it's the Norks, right, the North Koreans, they're probably trying to steal your Bitcoins. Okay, so that's now if it's a more sophisticated nation state, you know, like China, they might be after information, perhaps intellectual property, perhaps you know, personally identifying information that they can use for strategic reasons, long term. If it's Russia or Iran, it's probably going to feel a lot more kinetic, like it's going to be they're just going to smash and grab, destroy something. So once you know that, and you know the TTPs of the adversary already, because we have all of this catalog that's well known, you can then start to anticipate what will happen next and where you need to focus your attention. So where are the incident responders going to be monitoring the most closely? You know, which of our attack surfaces is going to be lit up, and how we're going to react to that. And then from there, what's the appropriate response? Sometimes you just dump a bunch of signatures onto the open internet. We've seen NSA do this recently. They just burn, they call it burning infrastructure. Once that information is out there, the adversary can no longer use that infrastructure because the whole world knows about it. And that's very expensive for them to replace. So, so we can do that sort of activity. Going down to the individual business level. So, so if you're a small to medium enterprise, attribution, I would say is probably not that important in that if you know it's this country, that country, there's not a lot you can really do about it. It's more important, I think, for the cyber professionals to do that on your behalf. If unless you're big enough to have in-house people that can use these kind of TTPs, sorry, tools, tactics, tools, techniques, and procedures.
We almost went a whole event without an acronym, so well done.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you can tell I worked in defense. Got a lot of acronyms. I think though it is important to understand what the nation state adversaries are likely to be after. I think as a small business owner, you can understand that. So are they after your customer database? This could be just adding to some vast trove of data that they use to just triangulate and identify targets. They could be trying to grab, for example, email addresses that they can then use for password spraying, for other kinds of attack. They might be trying to use your, as I mentioned earlier, use you as an attack vector to somewhere else. If you provide, you provide toilet paper to the Navy, right? If they can disrupt that supply, well, you can't really send a ship out of port without a supply of toilet paper. And I spoke to someone just recently who said if you buy the wrong brand, it clogs the drains, and then you've got the ship has to stay in port with a plumber looking at it. So this is very small actions at that level can have big implications, and I think just understanding the value of your data, understanding what your business looks like through the lens of a determined adversary is important to, yeah, that's the most important thing for attribution when you're a small company.
Thanks, Vaughan. That's really helpful to clarify. Hi, you're a small business owner. You started a successful startup and you've got a mandate now to really think about how to improve organisational capability and response to cyber attacks. I'm keen to pick up on your comments before about the Essential 8 sort of framework, and then also just your advice or your learnings out of your previous experience in terms of things that small business owners can do to start the journey of improving their capability, and also things that they can start to do to better be prepared for if something does go wrong.
Well, look, the Essential 8 is great, but the challenge is particularly for small businesses, how can I afford to implement the Essential 8? It is, the Essential 8 does focus on very technical controls, software particularly, and small businesses generally don't have big budgets like big business. So that is a big challenge. And so putting my small business hat on, particularly at the A3C, where it is a not-for-profit, and it is government-backed, but it is not-for-profit. It isn't funded like a large government organisation or large corporation. I think my first tip would be, of the Essential 8, you need to prioritise what are you going to do first. And if I look at what's valued for my organisation, it's obviously information and data and information about my staff and their personal details. So firstly, start with making sure your data is backed up. And that's an Essential 8 control, but not only make sure it's backed up, make sure you can actually get the data back. And look, very simply, if you're running Mac OS, for example, run Time Machine. Have that as your backup, because at least if your machine is crypto locked, you can use Time Machine to go back to a previous version that wasn't crypto locked. I mean, so something like that is just prioritizing the controls on what you can do today is probably where I recommend you start. Because if you go down the path of, oh, look, application whitelisting, that's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. MFA, I've got to buy all these tokens, it's going to be hard. And before you know it, and I've been guilty of this myself before, it becomes too hard, and then you procrastinate, and then you do nothing. And what you want to do is not do nothing, is do what you can today. And what you can do today is make sure that you can restore your data as quickly as possible so you can continue with business. So the reality is that if you can just restore from a backup and you can continue operations, then the business impact is quite low. Now imagine if you didn't have insurance. And again, another thing you can do today is you buy insurance. And apparently cyber insurance is actually rather cheap compared to other forms of insurance. At least if you've got that, you'll be covered, and you can actually turn on your insurer to help you in your time of need. Authentication is pretty good. Look, MFA is pretty common these days. And for those that don't know MFA, like TTPs, multi-factor authentication. Your iPhones all have it. Your iPhones have the ability to either read your fingerprint and scan your face, and also have a PIN code. So simple things like that will help you a lot with making sure that someone in China or Russia or wherever they are doesn't guess your password, because they need to guess your password and have your face at the same time, or have a token. And these tokens are $50 a pop these days, or they're using the authenticator apps that Google and Microsoft provide. They're free, and look, they are a bit of a pain in the ass to use. I get that, right? But it's going to be a much worse a pain to have, having to restore your systems. So look, MFA, we know we need it, but many places don't have it. That will fix a lot of your problems, because a lot of the times the attackers will just send an email, because emails are free, right? And they'll say, hey, look, we're so-and-so, we need to see your password, or we need your your details, so we do something. And it's really urgent. And unfortunately, humans being humans, we all want to help others. And the reality is that people will disclose their passwords. Another thing,
out of interest, put your hand up in the room if you've been subject to a phishing attack or attempt this year. Okay, about 90% of people put their hand up out of interest, which is very interesting and certainly not uncommon. And
another thing you can do is re-engineer your processes, right? And a good example is that at police, our HR system would send the managers an email saying, this person's applied for leave, click on this link. Right? So HR is saying do that, and we're saying don't click on links because it's potentially hackers. So again, that's a business problem, not an IT problem, right? The HR department needs to re-engineer its process to actually not encourage people to do things like that. So I think just take it one step at a time. The A3C is actually here to help. So again, we can actually help you prioritize those things. We can't do it all for you. We're not a well-funded organisation, and the reality is that we can't be. We're here to collaborate, not compete against other corporations and other organisations who can, but we can certainly connect you with that. So my tip to you guys is don't procrastinate. Do something about it. Take one step today, whether that's develop your fire evacuation drill or develop your cyber response drill. Awesome. That will help you from day one.
Awesome. Thanks, Hi. Michelle and Vaughan, I'd like to pick up on two pieces there. I mean, there's almost like, I guess, two parts of the puzzle. There's a people part, which came out really, I think, well in Hi's conversation there around HR sending emails and encouraging people to click on links. I think we've all been in organisations where that behaviour is rife. And then there's a technology piece where I guess I'm sure many business owners start to think about, the little steps, but also the big steps. And there starts to become many questions like, for example, how do I actually evaluate even my cybersecurity professionals that I might bring in? So Michelle, we might start on you with the people side of things. Like, you work across a whole number of the business community in Australia. What's your perception as to the internal capability or the people capability or the cultural capability within organisations? And do we actually need to start making bigger, often from a director level down, conversations or changes to actually really improve capacity in organisations?
Yeah, well, to start with the last piece first, the answer is yes. And to add to what Hi was saying, I think that in taking any of those steps or all of those steps that he suggested, I'd add an extra bit of homework to everyone. Talk about it. Talk about why you're doing it. The leadership is not necessarily something that comes from the director or the CEO or the manager down. Leadership in cybersecurity is actually in everyone. Show a better way is one of AustCyber's values, and we deliberately have that as a value for ourselves, but also to project into our industry, to be able to harness that really, really strong spirit of wanting to help and to solve problems. And so everyone can demonstrate leadership by talking about the fact that having backups matters, having password managers matter, having MFA matters, and these are the reasons why. And so I think that cultural piece is something that, culture is tricky. It's a bit like trust. It can be challenging to build. It's very easy to wipe out. But of course, it goes to all of those things that we're talking about, modern workplace cultures. If we can provide a collaborative environment for people to feel safe to make mistakes, as I've said to my team, with all of the phishing attacks that you can imagine come our way, for a whole range of different reasons, for goodness sake, do not stick your head in the sand. That's what I'll get cranky about as CEO. If you don't tell someone that something's happened or that you've clicked on a link, if you don't say it, that's what will march you out the door. Instead of saying, oh God, I clicked on the link, what do I do now? And I celebrate every time somebody says, I accidentally clicked on the link, you know, and then we of course do some training and make sure that everyone can see that it's okay to say that you got it wrong. But it's better to say that you got it wrong so that we can catch it as quickly as possible than to let it fly and all of a sudden we have a domino effect happening across all of our stakeholders, including our own systems. And of course, it's always been the case that, ha ha ha, wouldn't it be funny if our cyber got hacked? Well, no, it's not funny. But we can demonstrate these behaviours. And so I think that in terms of where we're up to as a nation, across all different sectors of the economy, so AusCyber is working, as Chris mentioned, across all sectors of the economy now. And what we're seeing is a very, very sort of colourful patchwork of differences in the way that different organisations talk about cyber. And absolutely, I think we're still in a space where we've got more than half of the economy not talking about cyber at all, ever. And so that needs to change, but we need to incentivise that to happen in a positive way, rather than it being seen as a negative or something extra that we've got to do that's just hard, you know, to incentivize it for it to be something that's celebrated when we get right. For the rest of the economy that is starting to do stuff around cyber, it's still, I think, within that sort of half, we've got half within that sort of see that it's an IT issue, not a business issue. And that's, you know, what Hai was mentioning. Absolutely, cybersecurity and privacy are matters that are business matters. The IT is an enabler to that. The IT is not going to be pointed at behaving in a particular way unless business tells it to. And the people involved in that are getting better at collaborating with each other. And the smaller the organisation, obviously, the more straightforward that is to do. The larger the organisation, well, there's different risks and vulnerabilities that are involved in having teams that are separate from each other and trying to have sort of more collaborative conversations around managing cyber risk in larger organisations presents all sorts of different challenges. But I think we have moved a long way. In the last 2 years in particular, I've seen a significant shift. And so what I would say for that sort of more than half of the economy that's not talking about cyber yet, I know based on the information that they are seeing in the news every day, they are open to the conversation. They are no longer closed to the conversation. Now, attitude is 9/10 of the law in this game. It's not possession, it's attitude. If you've got an open attitude to learn about what all of this means for your context, you actually already, you've just taken that first step actually, even before you get to the backups and the password managers and the MFA processes. Having the right attitude towards this is always going to put you in a better position than the person next to you who's closed to the conversation about this.
Thanks, Michelle. So Vaughan, you're running a startup in Melbourne. It appears from the surface level, taking Michelle's comments, you've got 50% of businesses say that aren't even thinking about cyber. You've got 1.5 billion plus being invested into cybersecurity over the next 10 years. What are the sorts of opportunity or sort of if I'm an entrepreneur sitting thinking, where's an opportunity for Australian businesses to start to partake, support and benefit from what is a real shift in opportunity set in the business landscape? You know, what are you seeing as opportunities for companies, potentially Australian startups, to start to play a role? And what are the problems that you look at and go, gee, this needs to get fixed, and there's a ripe opportunity for Australian companies?
I think a lot of the challenges we are facing are really about how to scale security down. So obviously, I don't have the answers. If I already knew, oh, here's a great hustle that can achieve this, I'd be doing that. You know, I'd be starting a second company and going after that as well. But you know, have a look at the kinds of control measures that a government agency or a bank would deploy, and this could include you know, the services they have access to. So they have all kinds of you know, fancy, highly degreed security experts who can provide, you know, world-class advice. They have all the cool you know, network toys and other threat detection, you know, network and endpoint detection. systems, and they have, you know, all the awesome training that their staff do these regular training briefings where, you know, you check a box and you know, you watch the video and answer the quiz, and then you know, you get these mock phishing emails sent to you, and if you click on them, you get scheduled for retraining. So how do we take all of that and scale it down to the level of a small business that has a very tight budget, they're operating on margins, and they don't have a lot of bandwidth to really go deep and understand this stuff. So, you know, to echo what Hai and Michelle both said, I think there's sort of two, you know, roughly two sides. Well, they always talk about cyber being a confluence of people, process, and technology. But if we treat people and processes as, you know, lump those ones together. So yeah, how do you foster a culture of security? And this is, I mean, this can be an intrinsic thing where, I've had the privilege of working in organizations where security culture is very much encouraged. You know, a junior like sailor or digger can go up to an officer and say, "Excuse me, sir, you left your monitor, you left your machine unlocked, and you know, that's a breach." So how do you take that kind of leadership and instill it into a small organization? And, you know, if you're an entrepreneur, how can you give small companies the tools to support them on that journey, to enable them to do that? And, you know, talking very small margins, obviously, so you have to deliver the service very efficiently, but how do you do that at scale? And I think I just want to make a special call out here to some friends of mine. I'm not a shareholder. I don't get paid to say anything. Cinch Security, CYNSH, are working on this exact problem. They are a fellow Cyrise, you know, cohort graduate, so good on them. On the technology side, so again, looking at the toys that the big organizations have, how do you make those scale down? I think there's a lot of room for disruption here. We've seen in the last 2-3 weeks, I can't think of a major brand of firewall or network gear that hasn't had an embarrassing authentication bypass. Like, honestly, it's ridiculous. There's got to be some Aussie technologists out there, some entrepreneurs who want to have a crack at building some secure network hardware from the ground up, and can probably do a better job than these global behemoths that have been selling us overpriced gear for far too long. So I'd say have a look at that. And yeah, depending on your level of technical prowess. So there's, yeah, a few ideas. But, you know, the way to think about it is, you know, if you ask people, what's your cyber budget? They're going to say, well, you know, nothing. Like, how do I do this for free? Okay, so you can read some, you know, you can download the Authenticator app for free. Maybe you can tell all your staff, hey, don't do bad things. There's a lot of things you can do for free. Using a password manager, they're almost free. But, you know, there is money here. I mean, if you think about, I mean, how many people own a bicycle? Probably everyone in the room, right? How much is a bike helmet, right? I mean, I bought a fancy one. It was like, I think $130. It's got, you know, it's aerodynamic. I probably could have got by with a much cheaper one. But how do you make security products that feel like just buying a bicycle helmet? And it's like just common sense. Everyone's doing it. At some point, you know, to be perfectly honest, the government is going to turn around and say everyone must do it. You know, down here in Victoria, we've all had to buy, you know, $10 masks because the government said you can't leave your house without one. I think soon you'll find, you know, already for APRA regulated organizations, CPS 234, you need to have certain control measures in place to call yourself a bank or a prudential organization. That is going to percolate down. If you're providing services to them, you will soon find that you need to achieve some minimum standard. So I think for entrepreneurs, I know it's a hard journey. I've been on the journey. I am on the journey myself. Sidearm is still very much a work in progress. If you start now, ahead of when those regulations come into force, privacy regs are going to happen in a big way. We have the mandatory data breach legislation. Expect the heat to go up. That is not going to be reversed. It's going to get more stringent before it gets less stringent. If you can see where that ball is going and, you know, chase after that ball, anticipate, build a product that's going to meet that need, you might get lucky.
Okay, thanks. We're going to rapid fire some questions to wrap things up, and we'll take them from either online or face-to-face. So if anyone face-to-face has got a question, just throw your hand up and Beck will come over. Harvey, we might take you first.
Yeah, hi, Harvey Marcus from Zoom. I'm both a Stone and Chalk resident here and a collaborator with A3C. So from the industry, my question is just extrapolating your last comment, Vaughan, but taking it to big business. We all know big business for many years spends a lot of money on audits where they have to be financially accountable. When does the panel see that translate into big business in terms of cyber risk at a practical level?
I'll jump in there. I think that it's going to happen within the next 12 months. The federal government's about to drop a new cybersecurity strategy, and I think that's going to be one of the features of it.
Thanks, Michelle. One more from the floor, and then we'll take some from online.
Yeah, Bruce Northcote, University of Adelaide. If you look at a country like Estonia that was radically attacked by Russia a long time ago, they basically redesigned the way of doing business in the whole country. Is now a time to be doing something similar in Australia?
They don't have a federation. So yeah, well, I think the National Cabinet is probably well positioned to be starting to ask those kinds of questions of Australia, but we won't get it done as quick as Estonia is what my comment would be on that.
And look, I think guys, double up on what Michelle said earlier, we need to change the culture. We need to change the culture that, just like health and safety culture, you certainly wouldn't walk around here and walk past some spilt water or milk on the ground. And culture starts from the top, from the very top, and having the Prime Minister get up and actually talk about cyber. And I can't remember too many Prime Ministers who actually go up and tell the whole country, we are under attack. Having the Premier of South Australia tell the CEOs of the most prominent companies in South Australia, we are under attack, you need to do something about it. That's a great start. Having CEOs, I think I've spoken to more CEOs about cyber with enthusiasm, they've received it with enthusiasm in the last 4 weeks than I have in my entire career. So if we want to change cyber, we need to start from the top, we need to start with culture, and culture start from the very top, from the CEO. Now, once that happens, then it will flow down to resourcing and people in the process will follow as well.
Thanks. Now, we've had a couple come through from online. One question that's come through is from someone that's interested in following a path or a career in cybersecurity, but doesn't want to do a 3-year degree. No surprises, thoughts, suggestions, advice?
The A3C is actually currently working now with the Department of Industry and Skills and also the educational sector to actually deliver some very short targeted courses to fill some of those gaps. We do have industry courses which are great, and they're very specific to certain technologies and certain technologies. But there is that career pathway that I think that's missing between essentially at the vocational level versus a 3-year degree. So we're actually working at the moment, and I had a meeting yesterday with the Minister for Education and the Minister for Innovation and Skills, and they are very keen on actually rolling out a traineeship apprenticeship type scheme in collaboration with industry to actually get people job ready in, we're talking about 5 to 12 weeks that we're actually working within organisations.
Okay.
And I'll just jump in there quickly too, because I will actually challenge High on that. AustCyber was the organisation that coordinated all TAFEs nationally to develop a Certificate 3 and a Certificate 4, as well as an advanced diploma in cybersecurity. So you can actually go, as much as that's not a 12-week course, and I think it's great that A3C is looking at that much shorter micro-credentialing piece, because that is absolutely the missing piece. But if you're looking for a 6 to 12-month qualification that is nationally recognised, then go to your local TAFE.
Fantastic. Any final questions from the floor? I will take one from Rowan.
Hi, this one's for Rowan Bishop from Adept Technology. With regard to the services, are you charging a fee to small, medium and large businesses for the education? Because I think you're also, it's like a member-based organisation. How does the model work?
Sure, so we're a not-for-profit. We receive some government grants to start up. So how we're actually developing our business model, and again, it's a very new organisation. Like many startups, we will need to pivot as we work out what the business model is. But at this stage, we've identified 3 groups of people who we believe we can help. Firstly, it's the consumers of cyber, the ones who need a helping hand to get on the right track. We obviously, being a not-for-profit, we have a tiered membership model to actually recuperate our costs to be sustainable. So there is a membership fee to receive some of those services. We also have what's called supplier members. They are essentially members who supply cyber services who want to increase the adoption of particularly their technologies or their services, but also help the community. And so we look at our members, our consuming members, and we say, well, look, what do you need? And we kind of find the supplying members who can actually deliver those services, and we bring them together. We've also identified a third category of members, and I think Cyber is a great example of that, and also the universities who have a good interest in actually sponsoring cyber adoption. So those organisations, we partner up with them, and we kind of bring the three groups together to come up with some collaborative initiatives and programs. And obviously, but if we don't charge for our membership fees, we don't charge a cost per se for some of the services, then we won't be sustainable. And that puts us at risk in relation to ongoing funding. So, but as a not-for-profit, we don't have to make a profit, and we will be able to deliver our collaborative services at a much lower cost to make it more available to all members.
Thanks, Hai. And for those online, we'll share all of the speakers' details, including Hai, Michelle and Vaughan's after the session, as well as a recording. Just in the interest of time, we'll leave with one sort of one sentence or less answer. Magic wand, you can change anything in Australia to improve our nations and our businesses' cyber resilience. What do you do? Over to you, Michelle.
Care. Just care more. Seriously, we've got all of the information at our disposal now. We've got all of the organisations that we need from an infrastructure point of view, like a knowledge infrastructure point of view, as much as we all need to get better at communicating who we are. And one of the questions was, do we need a sovereign industry? Yes, visit www.auscyber.com, the biggest cheerleader in the world for sovereign capability development. But we do need people to care more. And most importantly, out of that, we need leaders to care more, whether they're in the private sector, the public sector, academia. Care, for goodness sake.
Thanks, Michelle. Care. Vaughan, from you?
I would say two things. Firstly, more entrepreneurs who are willing to get into cyber. We've got a lot of talent. I'd say making the conditions in this country economically better for entrepreneurs would foster would encourage more of that activity. And secondly, venture capitalists. I think there are a few, including my investors, who are bold enough to invest in cyber. They understand it. VCs need to come to grips with what cybersecurity is and figure out how they can make a buck, and then start funding these local entrepreneurs.
Thanks. And last but not least, Hai, final words from you.
I have 3 words. Think cyber first.
Fantastic. And on that note, thank you everyone for joining us. For those online, there'll be a short survey to leave some feedback. And for those in the room, we've had some drinks and lunch arrive, so feel free to stick around and have a chat. A recording of this session will be sent around to everyone that was involved, as well as all the speakers' details. Awesome. Thank you, everyone.